So, one of the things that we focus on at the Katie Phang News Channel is the idea of meeting the urgency of the moment with the urgency of the message. And part of that is meeting people where they are. Congresswoman Kamlager Dove does that day in and day out, not only fighting in DC, but also making sure that she stays in touch with her constituents as well as Americans across the United States so that she knows exactly what makes them tick. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us here at the Katie Phang News Channel. How you doing?
Oh my God, thanks for having me. I'm trying to keep it together, probably like so many other Americans across this country. And heck, people across the world are looking at us, right? Sideways.
That is an understatement. I do think I think that we get a little bit more scrutiny than we normally do, and I think part of that is because we're obviously living in a time where uncertainty is the norm, and people are waking up with a level of fear and terror that really is unprecedented. And part of that stems from what used to be an issue, just considering immigration. Immigration was always kind of a black hole, I think, of information. I
Mhm.
think immigration has always been such a difficult system to navigate. And I've been very blunt here and publicly when I say that the immigration system has been broken not only during Republican administrations, but during Democratic ones. The key difference being, though, Democrats are not trying to basically kidnap you off of United States soil and not give you the due process that the Constitution guarantees. One of the things that you recently did, Congresswoman, is you went to Adelanto, which is a detention facility that ICE is using for purposes of detaining immigrants and prior to them, frankly, being just shipped off and whisked off in the dead of night to some third country at this point. Talk about
Mm.
what that experience was like, because I then want to follow up with you about something that we have in our own backyard here in Florida, which is called alligator Alcatraz. But I wanted to ask you about Adelanto and your observations, because a lot of people hear about them, but they don't actually go, and that's part of your oversight.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for the question. So, when I was in the state legislature, I worked a lot on our state prison system issues and the mistreatment of folks who are incarcerated, the suicide rates of folks who are actually working in the system. And then you think when you go to the federal level, you might not have to deal with those things. And then, oddly enough, here we are with Adelanto, and you're back again driving about 2 hours outside of LA to go to this facility that's run by a private company called Geo. That's actually a billion-dollar industry. So I'm just going to say a couple of things about it, right? They just signed a contract for $145 million with the U.S. Marshals. The border czar was a consultant for GEO. And then reports are coming out about Stephen Miller, who's actually been investing stock in these kinds of facilities. The other thing is it's a sole source, enterprise. So Geo's responsible for the staffing, for the food, for the maintenance. So of course they want to have as many beds possible
Money.
filled all the time. Exactly, because this is a money making enterprise. Human trafficking, kidnapping, slavery, they've always been money making enterprises. And this administration, unfortunately, is trying to find ways to do this as lawfully as they think they can. So you drive out there. I had a list of names of constituents that I was looking for, folks from my district who'd been snatched. We go there. You have to give them an A locator number. They want to give you a tour of the whole facility so that you don't have time to meet with the detainees. We said, hold all that. We want to talk to the folks first and do some constituent casework service. They couldn't find some of my constituents. I have one young man who is both deaf and mute. He does not have any criminal convictions, and they could not locate him. I ended up talking to a couple of other folks who shared that racial profiling was part of how they were snatched. They were asked to sign papers that were not being translated for them so that they understood what they were signing. This gentleman knew how to say no, and he said as a result, he was pressured and kind of like, tussled about. They're also being shipped. They're being put in planes and shipped around the country. Tennessee, Florida,
Louisiana.
Louisiana, that's right. So that they can't get in touch with their families, and B, they cannot connect with representation. The other thing we learned, this young man was snatched when he was going to the grocery store. I don't know how ICE has a list of criminals and knowing exactly where the criminals are going. They don't. They don't. And they're also meeting them outside of the courtrooms when they are going to get updates on their legal status. They're legally abiding by the law for their proceedings. So the young man was telling me all of this. He said that they've been wearing their outfits for 10 days, weren't able to change clothes, weren't able to change underwear. There was another young man who'd gone to Cal State LA. He was on vacation in the US Virgin Islands when they snatched him. Yes, they're supposed to have PIN numbers to allow them to use the telephone, but they were not getting PIN numbers, or they weren't getting the right PIN numbers. So there were so many human rights violations, quite frankly, that were going on. I don't know how the United States government can disappear people, and I don't know why we would not allow folks due process. People have a right to a speedy trial. They have a right to an attorney and representation. They certainly have a right to go to court. And, criminal proceedings get precedent over civil ones. So they should be moving through these things as quickly as possible rather than calling around to see where there are empty beds so that they can ship people to empty beds so that they can fill those empty beds with new people and keep this industry going.
Well, listen, I'm not being flippant when I say, Congresswoman, that the answer to your question is because those things, that due process concept, that apparently is only for white people. Because what we're seeing here is quintessential racial profiling. I spoke about it on my channel a few days ago about Narciso Barranco, the Mexican immigrant landscaper owning his own business. His three sons are the United States Marines. It's the one with the social media video that went viral of him getting beaten up by federal agents. And even his own sons are saying, how could it not be racial profiling?
Right.
And what's wild, because they're really just, oh, look, it's a Home Depot parking lot. Oh, look, it's a farm where people are working and they're brown, so they must be illegal. And it's so on its face offensive. But one thing you said that was so important is, what wasn't this whole idea about rounding up the violent criminals and getting them out of the United States? We have huge percentages, more than 70% of people that are in custody now, from the ones that we can actually contact and determine are in custody, right? They don't even have any prior contact with the criminal system alone. Right. So you represent the great state of California. It's the epicenter of so much that's going on right now. How are you then taking all of this amazing factual oversight, data gathering, evidence gathering? Like, what's the next step for somebody like you once you have all of this information in hand?
Well, first, it's compiling the data, right? I like to tell people California is the fourth largest economy in the world. And we also have the largest number of immigrants in the state. Yeah, I mean, in the country. Our state has the largest number of immigrants in the country. Those two data points go hand in hand. There is a reason why our economy is so vibrant. Then I like to say, let's widen the aperture and talk to me about who you think is an immigrant. I submit to you, we're only talking about rounding up brown folks. The man in the White House married 3 times, 2 of whom were to immigrant women. Let's talk about the contributions that our immigrant communities, have given to, have afforded this country to allow us to be so strong, so competitive, so innovative, right? And so why aren't these folks chasing folks in the doctor's offices, in the research labs, in the courtrooms, rounding folks up on the bench? Because we're rounding folks up in law enforcement, because you have immigrant communities in all places and spaces in this country. Then B, let's talk about the money. This is going to cost us an additional $1 trillion, these deportations, okay, to our deficit, because they want to build these big ass facilities. They're paying all of these folks. And let me tell you, in our Judiciary Committee, we actually passed, Republicans passed a bill that said they could hire January 6ers to Homeland Security and to ICE. So you actually don't know who these folks are, okay, wearing these Amazon purchased outfits, masked up, not giving you a judicial warrant, okay, and snatching you. And then taking you God knows where. So part of it is getting all of that information and then sharing it. I submit that the 15 million people who were protesting on No King's Day were saying, this is not right. This is not legal. This is not constitutional. And this is not what we're talking about when we're talking about immigration policy. 70% of the folks in Los Angeles who have been detained do not have a criminal conviction. I have never heard of a story about an MS-13 cartel boss who was in third grade, who was the Enrique selling ice cream in Culver City, who's been snatched. They're doing it to legal immigrants. They're doing it to folks working through the process and US citizens. And, in Florida, a 49-year-old Canadian killed in custody. Okay. So I think the more we talk about it, the more people get enraged. And then I think that's also why this administration starts pivoting and starts doing more dangerous and absurd things to distract us from staying
like
on point.
bombing Iran. Yeah.
Right, with no evidence. So, of course, we had a hearing. I mean, we had a little briefing today, which I was like, Elmo could have given me more information than what I was getting from you all. But this administration is about deflection, distraction, and fabrication. So we have to keep talking about all of these things to and through 2026 because we cannot continue this kind of backsliding.
Well, and the bigger picture theme here is always the kind of the white Christian nationalist great replacement theory idea, right? It's I call it the whiteification of America, because if you start taking, and it's a bait and switch too, legally speaking, you revoke temporary protected status, you revoke humanitarian parole status for people, you go to courts and you get these cases dismissed for people that are trying to go through the quote legal channels. Because, right, that's always the GOP retort. Well, yeah, I came here legally. Or why can't they just be here legally? And the people that are trying to do those channels, it doesn't make them better than those that don't. Let me be very clear. It does not. But those that are, the bait and switch is, psych, we're going to dismiss your case so that we can seize you in the hallway at the courthouse. Or, hey, you had that TPS, that temporary protected status. We're going to revoke it now. So now you're technically in illegal.
Right.
They're gaming the system so that you always lose if you're not white, basically.
And they're using fear and they're using ignorance around immigration to perpetuate these unlawful actions that they're doing. I like to remind people, Elon Musk came here illegally as an immigrant. Okay.
And he was an overstay as well. Mm-hmm.
He was an overstay as well. And what did we do? We gave him $400 million in US taxpayer dollars to help him with Tesla. The Republicans astound me because they're like quietly trying to call the administration to say, oh my goodness, this is too much. Now you're deporting Cubans. Now you're deporting Venezuelans. Now you're coming after the people that I actually am trying to represent. And this administration is saying, oh no, I'm an equal opportunity discriminator when it comes to deporting folks. And what I like to remind folks is economies will continue to tank and go into the gold toilet if these things continue. Farming, agriculture, hospitality, construction. I mean, A, B, ICE can't determine who's legal and who isn't. And that's even not their role. That's not even their role. That's what makes this almost like a horror movie from Tubi.
So you're in California. I'm in Florida. I'd rather be in California, frankly, than Florida. But I'm sure you have.
California.
But I'm sure you've heard kind of this. It dovetails with what you just said, though, Congressman, which is there's a lot of buyer's remorse out there now.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in our Hispanic and Latino communities. There is a lot of buyer's remorse. And look, I always say this because I like to be very honest with everybody and transparent. My humanity struggles a little bit because I do believe that this is the find out part. Because listen, he was very adamant. And one thing you can say about the orange turd is this. He was very clear about day one what he was going to be doing. So to the extent that somebody's sitting there now saying, oh my God, look what's happening to me. Well, you were okay with it happening to somebody else until it actually impacted you. And then there's a part of me that's like, well, you know what? Look, sometimes people have to go through it themselves before they find the humanity and the empathy to maybe understand why that was bad in the first place. But along the way, a lot of innocent people get ensnared in these very wide nets of terror. What are you hearing about this from your constituents in California about this idea of buyer's remorse to support Trump? Because listen, immigration was a huge pillar of that campaign of his.
Yeah. A lot of my constituents say, don't cry for me, Argentina, because we were
And
out hustling.
Venezuela and Cuba,
Right,
but I
right.
could go on. Yeah.
Yeah, we were out hustling, trying to get folks to vote, trying to say, hey, 2025 is real. This is exactly what this man is going to do. And why do you have to have so many purity tests when you're talking about our candidates, when you really are
Yes.
looking at both of them disproportionately? And I think this is a reminder that when you go into the ballot box and you're only thinking selfishly about you rather than recognizing that you are part of a larger community, you are going to get screwed 9 times, 10 times out of 10. And a lot of folks went into the ballot box and they said, hey, I hope this guy does screw them because those folks are not like me, without really thinking two or three or even one step ahead to say, actually, we are connected. Our economies are connected. The cost of living is connected. How we're able to have a safe community is connected because, folks who've deported or who are detained are not paying rent. You might be a landlord. Where are you getting that rent money from, right? Folks who are detained or deported might be your employees. Hell, they might even be your employer. Hey, they might even be the person who is tutoring your child. And then what are you going to do? So this is an opportunity for us to widen the aperture and say, what role am I playing in my community? We are in the find out stage, and it's going to get worse and more uncomfortable. And I do not have I do not have time for folks who want to come back to me and say, can I get a refund?
Mm.
Because you cannot.
So I'm glad you brought up GEO at the beginning, that's
Mm,
running, operating, maintaining that Adelanto ICE facility, because GEO also runs and operates Delaney Hall, which is in Newark, New Jersey, which was the scene in May of that absurd arrest of Newark Mayor Ras Baraka, but also the scene of your three colleagues from
mhm.
Congress, including LaMonica McIver, who ended up getting indicted by Alina Habba. And I have a whole video that I'm doing about that on my YouTube channel here. But, what really alarms me is it's LaMonica McIver, it's Ras Baraka, who ended up getting his trespass charge dismissed, though. It's Hannah Dugan, it's Alex Padilla. I mean, I could just keep on ticking off this. Talk about this concept of creating the climate of fear, even in a co equal branch of government. The
Well,
executive branch trying to intimidate members of Congress so that you
yeah.
guys just stay on the sidelines silent and you don't say anything.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. This is an administration that doesn't believe in the three branches of government, and in fact, only wants there to be one branch of government, right? So he said, well, I had my folks and we tried to buy as much of the Supreme Court as we could and some of these lower courts with these appointments. They need to do right by me. And if they don't, then we're going to try and impeach them, even though we want to say we're not going to, but we certainly want to limit their ability and their authority. And then you have the congressional branch, right? The legislative branch, Republicans saying, okay, Daddy Trump, whatever you want. I have lawyers in judiciary who are Republican. And if there was any other person who was in the Oval Office, they would not be doing what they're doing. But this complicity, this silence is really deafening. And all of their bar cards, I think, should be snatched. The whole thing with LaMonica is about intimidating women. Okay, because they've like gone after the parliamentarian in the Senate who's a woman, right? She should be fired because
She's
she's
just
doing
doing
her
her job
job.
too.
Right.
Exactly.
And she's saying, no, I'm not going to let you thieve on the Senate side. Right. And so with LaMonica, it's like, I'm going to silence you. We're going to show brown, black, Asian, women that you're not in control. We're going to drop the charges for these other folks, but we're going to go in hard in the paint and hopefully folks won't rally behind her or around her. And the kicker is, even if there was this mosh pit that was really instigated by these agents, and we still don't know
Exactly.
who they are,
Yep.
then they bring them into the facility, they give them Coke and crackers, they give them a tour. And this sister is actually on the Homeland Security Committee. So if anyone has jurisdiction, and all of us do to conduct oversight, it certainly is the woman who's on the Homeland Security Committee who is going to look at a detention center. So that's how you know all of this is a farce. And once again, it is to distract us from a very petty and petulant person in the White House who is determined to take away our rights and freedoms, silence us from dissenting, which actually is a right that we have, and then steal all of our money so that he can have slush funds to do whatever he wants to do. We are still going to be around when he is gone, and we're going to have so much shit to clean up.
So I want to remind our viewers that are tuning in right now and listening that the parliamentarian has a very distinct role, and it's a neutral role. It's literally going through the proposed budget bill and cleaning up where the Republicans have screwed it up. And by the way, when Democrats screw it up too, can be language, can be overreach, it can be just technical things. And so the fact that it's in the process is called the bird bath. It's literally going through the bird bath and trying to shake off the stuff that doesn't actually apply or work, and not in a policy sense. The fact that they're going after the parliamentarian now just goes to show you that they know that they've done it wrong, they being the Republicans. You know, Congressman, I just wanted to also ask you this. I have been saying this time and time again here and on social media that part of what we need to do is, and this is a part of your journey, is we need to also lean into state and local politics, because for most people, politics is local. We see the chaos caused by Republicans in DC. We see the dysfunction. We're obviously impacted by it, across the United States. But a lot of us sometimes just are more impacted by our school board members. We're more impacted by our dog catchers. I mean, literally what happens, our mayors and our governors, I mean, especially me with DeSantis. My question for you, I am always encouraging people, even when the numbers don't look good and even when it seems daunting, that they should lean into running for office, or they should, try to be more involved locally. I know that was part of your journey. Talk about why you also think that's a form of resistance. That's a form of protest by being involved locally and on the state level.
Yeah, so I got my start because my boss, who was an elected official, told me to run. And she told me to run multiple times. She said, "You are as qualified as anybody else. You've been working with me. You know the constituents. You know the district. You know the issues. You can do it." You always do think there's someone out there more qualified than you. And then oftentimes you look at the men and you're like, I know I'm more qualified than that person. I ran and I was on the community college board. It's a $6 billion enterprise. Half of that money is about construction and small jobs and businesses and vendors and building. And then half of it's about education. And it was a really great training ground for me to get a snapshot of all of the different issues that really help us educate and prepare young folks for maybe going to a 4-year university or maybe opening a business and getting vocational training. Well, that's actually a great formula for any other kind of elected office that you run for, including federal, because as you said, all things are local. I'm here at the federal level, but you know what? If we're cutting Department of Education, if we're cutting Department of Transportation, if we're cutting FEMA or using FEMA dollars that should be going to natural disaster relief to actually build the Alligator Alcatraz, that's money that's not going to your local school boards. That's money that's not going to your local transportation officials or to your city, or to your county, who needs that money to help with infrastructure, to help to rebuild, to find ways to subsidize small businesses. When we're cutting small business administration loans, that's impacting your city's ability to encourage more trade or to help local businesses get started. So we have to really talk about what's in front of us on our block and connect with folks in the most authentic of ways and talk about change. I see in the midst of all this chaos that there have been wins, right? We had the Wisconsin Supreme Court. We had Omaha, Nebraska. New York was 2 Democrats, but we saw a change election there. And we saw Pennsylvania, 2 red seats. We saw a toss up with the U.S. Senate race in Arizona. We know that when folks are going to the ballot box, especially now and on a go forward basis, they are looking at this chaos and they say, I don't want that coming to my city. And I don't want that for our federal government.
I am finding that the conversations I have, and listen, of course, we love and appreciate our male allies and advocates, but it really is women and women of color. And part of that is because we have an intimacy of the struggle. And we
Mm-hmm.
understand the sometimes the underestimation of
Mm-hmm.
what it takes to be able to get things done. And so, Congresswoman, I thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. I invite you to continue this conversation anytime with me, because I think that you are bringing the authenticity that I speak of all the time, the authenticity of who you are, your journey, your experiences. And that's what people want. They want fighters in DC. They want fighters locally as well, but they really need people that are going to say, I've walked this path with you and I'm here to be able to represent your voice in DC.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. I had such a good time with you. And I just want to share a quick story. Before all of this drama happened, I was in the district for my district work period, and I have an API collective. And so we had all of these folks from the API community. I mean, Filipino community, Korean, Chinese, Japanese. I mean, it was Vietnamese. It was wonderful. And they were saying, we're really scared because when you're talking about immigration, it seems like folks are not thinking about us, but we also know that we're in the crosshairs and we're concerned about our elders, we're concerned about our young people, and we know that we have helped contribute to the tapestry of this city. And will you stand with us? And it was such an emotional,
Wow.
sobering, connective discussion. And those discussions are happening in so many ethnic communities across the country. And we have an obligation. We have an obligation to make sure that we are making space for everybody in this moment who feels afraid and who knows that they have contributed to what is the greatness of this country.
I think this is the conversation you and I have just had, and those that you have just spoken about. That's the coalition building that's happening. It doesn't have to be on some grand scale that's heralded with a lot of news and a lot of coverage, and it doesn't have to be a big bombastic event. The coalition build happens just in the understanding that we are doing something together. And whether it's support or whether it's advocacy, whether it's going out in the streets, that's our coalition build. And that's why I firmly believe that the tide will turn imminently to our favor if we continue to call it out. And that's why you, Congresswoman, you are doing that. You're calling it out and you are fighting the good fight. And so I'm grateful for you. So thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you, Queen. I enjoyed this.
Thank you. Katie Phang here. The truth matters now more than ever. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for watching.